Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this on-demand individual paper. And thank you to the Association for Asian Studies for giving me the opportunity to share this talk. My name is John Mitchell, and I'm a research fellow at Meiji Gakuin University Peace Research Institute in Tokyo. The main area of my research is the impact of military operations on the environment, particularly in Okinawa Prefecture. I'm the author of 4 Japanese books on this subject, and in 2021, my English book, Poisoning the Pacific, was a winner in the Society of Environmental Journalists Annual Book Awards. Today, during this talk, I would like to discuss these main points. First, the relationship between colonialism and military contamination. After that, I'll turn to Okinawa, the impact of military operations there, and what happened in 2016. In that year, Okinawa experienced its largest environmental catastrophe since World War II. As a result, there emerged a remarkable collaboration across a diverse field of actors who coalesced to investigate this injustice. I'll end by explaining some of the achievements of this coalition. First of all, it is essential to understand the inextricable relationship between military contamination and colonialism. Throughout the 20th century to the present day, it is indigenous peoples who've been suffering the brunt of harm from military environmental damage. China exposed hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs during its nuclear weapons detonations at Lop Nua. The British tested mustard agent on Indians and detonated atomic bombs in Australia, contaminating indigenous Australians. In the Marshall Islands, the US exploded the equivalent of 1.6 Hiroshima bombs per day for the 12-year period between 1946 and 1958. Indigenous peoples all around the world have suffered disproportionately from military contamination. And there's one region where this is especially clear, the Pacific. During the 20th century, an identical pattern of colonialism and contamination played out across the Pacific region, in the Marshall Islands, on Guam, on Saipan, on Tinian. During World War II, all of these islands were subject to brutal Japanese control, and they were liberated at great bravery and loss of life by US troops. Residents hoped this liberation would bring them human rights and the full protection of the American Constitution. But instead, these islands were forced into a geopolitical grey zone, which enabled the military to seize the best land, packing it with bases or using it to test weapons of mass destruction. Much of that land is still occupied today, or the land that was returned was contaminated so badly that restoration cost millions of dollars, or it could never be returned to regular use. Nowhere, I argue, is this pattern more clear than Okinawa, dubbed by the American military after World War II, the junk heap of the Pacific. Between 1945 and 1972, Okinawa was governed as a de facto military colony, protected by neither the Constitution of the United States nor that of Japan. By 1955, US military land seizures had displaced more than 1/3 of the main island's population, some 250,000 people. Okinawa was ruled by a military governor who had the ultimate say over what happened to the island and its residents. Because the military controlled Okinawa, it could do things there which it couldn't do in mainland Japan or in the United States. Notably, during its 27-year occupation, the military stockpiled Okinawa with an enormous arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, approximately 1,000 nuclear warheads, 13,000 tons of chemical weapons. Also, there were biological weapons tests at Shuri, Ishikawa, and Nago. Accidents occurred with these weapons of mass destruction, and I explain some of them in my book, Poisoning the Pacific. Also, there was the daily negligence of military operations, spills of fuel and solvents, oil leaks, and lead contamination from gunnery ranges. In 1972, Okinawa was returned to Japanese control with the promise to Okinawans that reversion would take place according to the principles of Kakunuki Hondo Nami, which means no nuclear weapons and a base presence proportionate to mainland Japan. The nuclear and chemical weapons were almost certainly removed, but today there are still 31 American military bases on Okinawa, 70% of the total US military presence in Japan. Inevitably, such a heavy concentration of military bases on Okinawa has concentrated the contamination too. On the slide, there is a timeline produced by Okinawa Times. It runs from 1947 to the present day, cataloguing some of the worst incidents of environmental contamination, including depleted uranium, radioactive strontium-90, and dioxin. The QR code on the slide links to the full timeline. I invite you to explore it in more detail at your leisure. In 2016, Okinawans learned the drinking water for 450,000 residents had been contaminated with substances called PFAS, aka forever chemicals. PFAS are a family of thousands of substances used in non-stick frying pans, waterproof clothes, and wrapping for greasy food. They are a key ingredient in the firefighting foams used at military bases. PFAS are known as forever chemicals because they are almost impossible to break down in the environment, and they accumulate in our bodies for many, many years. PFAS damage the health in a myriad of ways. They can harm our hormones and immune system, increase our cholesterol levels, and raise the risk of some cancers. Children are particularly susceptible. In 2018, the head of the American EPA declared PFAS contamination a national emergency. As I said, PFAS are a component of firefighting foams at military bases, and according to the DoD, approximately 700 bases in the US are contaminated with PFAS. Local communities and farms have been severely polluted too. The Pentagon has acknowledged PFAS pollution at its facilities within the United States. Also, the Pentagon has admitted to contamination at its bases in Germany, Belgium, Honduras, and South Korea. But as we shall see, the situation in Japan has been far more opaque. In 2016, Okinawa Prefecture announced it had detected elevated levels of PFAS in rivers near Kadena Air Base. Also, drinking water wells within and around the base were contaminated. These rivers and wells comprise the water source for 450,000 residents. Further checks by Okinawa Prefecture detected severe contamination at two other bases, Futenma Air Base and Camp Hansen. Sacred springs, farmers' fields, drinking water wells were all highly polluted. When such contamination is detected near military bases in the United States, the DoD investigates the problem, holds meetings with impacted communities, and provides alternative drinking water supplies. But in Japan, there is no such transparency or accountability. The reason lies in bilateral agreements between the US and Japan, primarily the U.S. Japan Status of Forces Agreement. These agreements do not provide Japanese authorities with the right to enter bases to check for contamination, and Japanese taxpayers are entirely responsible to pay for the cleanup costs of military land returned to civilian usage. So, following the 2016 announcement about Okinawa's drinking water contamination, the barriers to resolving the problem seemed very high. But in response to these obstacles, there emerged a unique coalition of actors who collaborated in remarkable ways. I'd like to explore three main groups: the Okinawa civic organizations, the academic medical community, and members of the mass media. All of these provided different skills and knowledge to investigate PFAS contamination on Okinawa. The first group, which I'd like to discuss, is civic organizations. On Okinawa, residents have a long history of involvement in protecting the natural resources of their communities. Much of this desire was triggered by the destruction of their island during World War II, which caused untold devastation. Also, while the island was governed by the US, environmental degradation continued as the military seized land at will to build new bases and bombing ranges. Post-reversion, from 1972 onwards, Okinawa's environment came under further threat from Japanese government proposals to rapidly industrialize the island. In response to these plans, there arose grassroots civic groups. They opposed the construction of a large petroleum storage facility in Kinbei and a civilian airport on Ishigaki Island. Civic groups also organized against new American military projects in Okinawa, notably helipads in Yambaru and a new Marine Corps base in Ora Bay. These civic groups included members of the communities directly impacted by the projects, as well as activists from other parts of Okinawa and sometimes mainland Japan. They created connections with overseas organizations with shared goals, such as coral protection. This diversity brought in a variety of skills and experiences. Often these groups were loose-knit and members participated in more than one campaign. Grounded in this long history of environmental activism, civic groups were quick to react following Okinawa Prefecture's 2016 announcement about PFAS contamination. Community members researched the risks of PFAS in Japanese and overseas scientific literature. They created accessible materials for local meetings to educate residents about the problem. These groups include Ginowan Chiramizu Kai and Yukifuso Kagobutsu, Osenkara Shimin no Seime or Mamaru Renraku Kai. Members consist of farmers, restaurant owners, retired school teachers, and local elected officials. These groups also brought in experts from mainland Japan to give lectures about PFAS. As the pandemic spread, these events were often held online. In April 22, the Renraku Kai organized a large protest meeting in Ginowan City. This brought together musicians, overseas and Okinawan experts. The meeting ended with a demand for the Japanese and US authorities to investigate and resolve the problem of PFAS contamination. Such large-scale meetings tapped into a long lineage of Okinawan protests against injustices, such as crimes committed by American military personnel and the Japanese government's whitewashing of World War II atrocities in school textbooks. The second community which has contributed to exploring PFAS contamination is medical experts from the Graduate School of Medicine at Kyoto University, one of Japan's leading institutions in the field. In particular, Professor Emeritus Koizumi Akio and Associate Professor Harada Koji brought decades of knowledge about environmental contamination to investigate the problem on Okinawa. To determine how long PFAS contamination has been continuing, Koizumi turned to historic samples at the Kyoto Biological Specimen Bank. This bank holds blood that had been taken in 1981 from farmers living near Kadena Air Base. When Koizumi reanalyzed this blood, he detected high PFAS levels, suggesting that residents have been exposed to these substances for 4 decades or longer. Civic groups often work in close cooperation with these experts from Kyoto University. In June and July 2022, the Renraku Kai arranged for blood samples to be taken from 387 residents. Volunteers set up centers to conduct the sampling, and the blood was analyzed by Associate Professor Harada. It was the first widespread survey to assess the extent of PFAS contamination on Okinawa, and the results were very worrying, with average PFOS levels 1.5 to 3 times higher than Japan's national average. This collaboration between civic groups and members of the medical community served to make the authorities take note of the problem. Prefectural and national governments had not agreed to residents' demands to conduct such tests. The third and final group which I'd like to discuss is the media. And please allow me to note that I contribute to one of the prefecture's newspapers, Okinawa Times. Since 2016, the media on Okinawa has been proactive in gathering and disseminating information about PFAS. One of the main ways has been via the US Freedom of Information Act, aka FOIA. In Japan, although the US military is generally not required to abide by Japanese law, it is required to abide by US law, including FOIA. Documents obtained in this way have provided unprecedented insight into PFAS contamination in the prefecture. According to FOIA-released documents, there have been numerous accidents involving PFAS firefighting foams. This photo on the slide, for example, it shows a spill from Futema Air Base in April 2020, which leaked about 148,000 litres of contaminated water into the local community. The most serious source of PFAS contamination comes from the firefighting areas within the bases, and PFAS contamination is extensive. In 2018, the Marine Corps produced this map, and it shows PFAS contamination at its firefighter training area. And notably, water flows from this site towards an off-base elementary school. When this issue was reported by the media, parents asked the local education board to test the school grounds for contamination, but they declined. Likewise, the American military refused to respond to questions about the matter. With the authorities unwilling to help, the Ginoan Chiramizukai arranged for experts to sample soil from the school grounds. Upon analysis, they revealed very high levels of contamination. As a result, the school cordoned off the contaminated areas to ensure children would not enter them. This highlights how, faced with the obstacles erected by the authorities and the military, these communities were able to investigate and ultimately protect local children from potential exposure to these harmful substances. Whenever possible, documents obtained via FOIA have been made available to the public. This ensures full transparency and encourages accountability within the media itself. In conclusion, I'd like to explain how cooperation between these three communities has contributed to concrete achievements at a local and a national level. Within Okinawa, by raising awareness of the risks of PFAS and communicating these risks, many residents have opted to install water filters to lessen their exposure. Moreover, Okinawa Prefecture has introduced activated charcoal filters, and it's reduced intake from the contaminated wells and rivers near Kadena Air Base. Nationally, spurred by revelations about contamination on Okinawa, the Japanese government has introduced nationwide safety guidelines for PFAS in drinking water and the environment. It will also consider adopting soil guidelines this year. Moreover, on mainland Japan, residents living near military bases have started their own campaigns modeled on the Okinawa pattern of cooperation between civic groups, medical experts, and the media. For example, near Yokota Air Base in Tokyo, where the military is suspected of contaminating the drinking water too, local communities have organized blood samples to determine the extent of contamination. This talk has been short, but I hope it has highlighted the ways in which these communities have cooperated to investigate the largest injustice, environmental injustice, in Okinawa's modern history. In the coming years, as militarization of this region escalates, it is vital that all nations instigate policies to ensure environmental protection. To leave you with the words of the preeminent scholar Ui Jun, war is the ultimate environmental destroyer. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me via this link. And thank you very, very much for listening to this talk. Thank you.